Did you? Falcha, welcome back. This is Irish Granny Tarot, and this is video number 2 on our book, Natural Causes. Let me put my coffee cup on it. Natural Causes by Barbara Ehrenreich. I sure hope I'm saying that right. So we've been talking about, we're answering the question, just how scientific is medical science? Gets a little scary here. So the history of medical science in general, the roots of it in science are kind of tenuous. 150 years ago, there was no medical profession. You just hung out a shingle. And at the end of the 19th century, some elite college educated doctors spent part of their last work in college going to Germany and studying with German medical laboratories. And this is where the whole notion of a white coat comes from in the doctor's world. It became the uniform of elite doctors who had let people know they'd been to Germany. And it was a symbol of mastery and control. Of course, it was a lot better than the black frock coats that they wore. They kept a coat at work. Those long-tailed kind of coats, and they'd be covered in vomit and dried blood, and they were just filthy and disgusting. So the white lab coats really were a nod to sterility as well, to practicing infection control as well. You could extrapolate that medicine is merely laboratory science in action. It's the business of scientists, really. College science courses often bear no relevance at all to medicine. You take organic chemistry, it's got nothing to do with practicing medicine. It might be handy if you want to be a pharmacist, but the veneer of science, it works to deter the critics of the practice of medicine, and it bamboozles people with an area most people don't know a lot about. You sort of smoke and mirrors. We know organic chemistry, don't ask us questions. The early medical professional reforms closed the door to all but the very top elite white men who could afford to go to college. And at the time, only 5% of people could afford to go to get a college degree. And they were called gentlemen too, so it was this element of social superiority around the whole thing. The connection between medicine and laboratory science grew up into an extractive industry, a medical field where they were always taking things from the patient, samples, and giving it to the lab. That became the whole focus of the medical field. This objective data collecting mattered more than what the patient had to say. For example, it's still true today, women's cardiac conditions. Women are misdiagnosed, dismissed with cardiac conditions all the time, 50% of the time. And so my advice would be, you think something's wrong with your heart and you go to the doctor and they brush you off, get a second opinion if you still think that, Anyway, they give the example of this guy who had Ebola. Nobody knew it yet, but he had Ebola. And he went to the emergency room and he told them, hey, listen, I've been in Africa. I just got back from Liberia, where they had an Ebola outbreak. And they sent him home with Tylenol. Oh my God. You go to the doctor and it takes a half an hour to fill out the questionnaire, all the little, have you ever had warts? Have you ever had hammer toe? And you fill out this whole thing. And then when you go in and you sit down again, they ask you this stuff all over again. The best patient in the eyes of doctors, she's being snarky here, and the first patient that all medical students have is a cadaver. Something inert that doesn't talk back and give you a hard time. So nowadays they're beginning to see that that's really not a good thing, because cadavers are not in any way really like a living human body. And if you need to learn anatomy, you can use models, and so a lot of medical schools are doing that now. But there's a fear too that evidence-based medicine can be used as a tool to deny care to people. If you go in and you don't have the lab result they're looking for, or you don't have the microscopic thing that they're looking for, or the set of symptoms that they're looking for, you could be dismissed, not taken seriously. Very true for women, very true for minorities. If you remember, I mentioned a book, I'm going to show you this book, by Timothy Snyder. And he was horribly ill and went to the doctor and almost died. Lessons in Liberty from a Hospital Diary. And one of the things that struck me about his story, maybe I should do this book, it's a really good book, is that he called a friend of his, close friend, who African-American woman who happens to be a doctor, and I think she was a doctor at one of the Ivy League places, Harvard, Yale, someplace. And he had been in a foreign country. He came back to the United States. He was really, really sick. He called this friend and said, you got to help me out here. They're not giving me the kind of care I need to be getting, and I don't know what's wrong. And so she went to the hospital to advocate for him, and they treated her like garbage because she was a woman and she was African American. So he decided to write this book, and it is fascinating. But I digress. Chapter 4, the crushing of the body. Tons of alternative treatments abound. If you have back pain, if you go to an orthopedic surgeon, they're going to want to do surgery. But you can also be offered massage, acupuncture, reflexology, Reiki, yoga, micronutrient infusions. And all of this is alternative treatment that is evolved from other cultures and from other time periods. And in the 20th century, the late 20th century, a popular approach that sort of became the big fad was physical fitness. Everything could be treated by the appropriate physical fitness. So all of a sudden, there was this growing availability of gymnasiums, and in the 1970s, a gym was a no-frills sort of place, a bunch of hulking guys with free weights and no decorations, nothing fancy about it. Today, there are 186,000 health clubs globally that generate $81 billion a year, $26 billion a year in the United States from gyms. And it's a great gig for the gym owner, because once you buy your equipment, it's not a huge investment. You have to pay insurance, but there's not a huge investment once the equipment is yours. There's also a huge demand because people are becoming more and more self-absorbed. She says it's become fashionable to take on a new hobby yourself. We are living in a culture of narcissism, and she thinks it's probably the pendulum swinging, a retreat from politics and a repudiation of the 1960s sort of communality, care for other people, that now we're reacting against that, and everything's become selfish and self-absorbed. She says, for example, Jerry Rubin, in the 70s, he became a New Age faddist, and he became a proud capitalist entrepreneur and a physical fitness promoter, and pawned himself off as a role model for personal growth. As time passed, the sociological map was redrawn, and professors disappeared. There was deindustrialization of America. Remember, we read with Fiona Hill. it's not uncommon to find people with a PhD on food stamps. I mean, the economic system has changed dramatically, and young people are showing a huge drop in altruism and in social concern, and part of this whole thing is all about self-obsession, and narcissism is how it's manifesting itself. In 1987, 73% of the people answered in a questionnaire their top goal in life was to be rich. And there's no such thing anymore as jobs for life. There's no more retiring and getting a gold watch. But you can control your body. That's something that you can have some control over. Well, some of us can. I don't know about the rest of us. Jim Fixx, who wrote The Complete Book of Running, said, having lost faith in much of society, government, business, marriage, the church, and so on, we seem to have turned to ourselves, putting what faith we can muster into our own minds and bodies. And he quoted one of his followers as saying, running gives me a sense of controlling my own life. Let's see, where did I go? There, serious issue for women is controlling their bodies. For a very long time, women were, don't gain more than 20 pounds when you're pregnant, which is so unhealthy. And just this narrow, literally and figuratively narrow image of what a woman could look like. And became, with the feminist movement, a serious political goal for women. Instead of getting smaller, women decided they were going to get stronger. For example, Jane Fonda, who had an eating disorder from trying to starve herself thin, and she got into that whole Jane Fonda jazzercise exercise thing with the leg warmers and the leotards. Some said that women were masculinized by the fitness culture, that they got too bulked up. And some said that men were feminized by it because they became more objectified and held to a more rigid standard of appearance and more obsessed with their appearance. Fitness became a class cue. Whether or not you smoked, whether or not you went to the gym or did yoga, the kind of food that you ate. Food and diet fads just completely went off the rails. In 1970, the typical American diet got 40% of its calories from fat. But then lower fat diets became popular, and by 2000 it was 34%, which doesn't seem like that much, but I guess it is. It did end in the obesity epidemic, because what did people do? Fat gives food flavor, and so what did they do? They started adding sugar and salt and carbs, and they gained weight. Working out is kind of a visual cue of conspicuous consumption. It's done by the rich. Working class people get their workouts from exercising at work by actually working, and wealthy people are less physically demanded upon. They need a reason to exercise. Blue collar, lower working class people get enough exercise while they're doing their jobs. Working out resembles working. It's regimented and it's socializing in gyms that are discouraged. It's very controlled and businesslike. Focus is supposed to be on controlling your body. A function of the majority social class of a gym is often managerial. I'm trying to think of how to say it. The job of most of the people who go to gyms, they're usually, now this is a huge exaggeration because there's meatball type guys is what they're called in New Jersey, and the Goomba kind of over testosterone guys that work out like Arnold Schwarzenegger types. I know he's intelligent, but you know what I'm saying. It's a stereotype. But the fad that people bought into is bought into by sort of the managerial class of people. I didn't know this, but companies didn't care about employee health until they realized that they could lower their insurance expenses, or thought that they could lower their insurance expenses. And this led to a $6 billion industry in creating and managing corporate wellness programs. So companies thought, oh, if we can get people healthy, it'll cost us less in insurance. But it didn't get studied. They just made the assumption, they made the leap, and they started these wellness programs at work. And often they became compulsory at work because if you didn't join, then they charged you more for your health insurance. And waiving the increase of the health insurance costs would be like the reward for you to undergo health assessments and submit to the gym, which usually is all about weight loss. And employees started complaining that these wellness programs were coercive and intrusive and causing stress. In 2014, a study showed that contrary to the claims that they have little effect on contrary to the claims that these programs have a positive effect, they show that they have little effect on employees' health care and how much money they spent on it. So fitness began to have sort of this control/moral imperative to it. It became a sign or a symbol of your moral superiority. The cost of sloth, gluttony, alcohol intemperance, reckless driving, sexual frenzy, and smoking is now a national and not an individual responsibility. One man's freedom in health is another man's shackle in taxes and insurance premiums. The doctrine of individual responsibility means the less than fit person is a suitable source not only of revulsion, but resentment. Why should I contribute to the care of those degenerates who choose to smoke and eat cheeseburgers? Sorry, just amusing. So, actually, they did this study and they found out that medical doctors know nothing about nutrition and they know nothing about diet. Now, maybe this is about 5 years ago, so maybe that's not entirely true anymore, but for the most part, they don't study much of that in medical school. The fitness movement is sort of antagonistic to the medical field and vice versa, because the fitness movement challenges doctors and makes what they do irrelevant. People are starting to take their own responsibility for themselves and not look at the advice of doctors. They don't value the advice of them so much anymore. Doctors decided to insert themselves into people's fitness journey by doing blood tests and blood pressure checks, and suddenly there was technology that could intervene, and so for a while that sort of ameliorated the doctor's resentment towards the fitness world. And then Silicon Valley invented all these apps and gadgets to monitor yourself. By 2015, more than 30% of Americans were wearing health monitoring devices. Many of the same people who don't want to get vaccines because they're afraid the COVID vaccine will insert a microchip and they'll be tracked, But they're wearing one of those watch things that monitors you all the time. So some doctors feel very threatened by them and call them toys. They say they foster hypochondria. However, there's a movement afoot to use them to you use the app, and with a watch or whatever it is you're measuring yourself with, and you can use them to completely bypass the medical profession, because they have these special apps now that will interpret it for you and tell you what's wrong with you. And the advertising is, you got a condition, we got an app. New startups are doing what's called aggregator platforms, which are collating data from all these different medical devices people have and leaving doctors out of the loop completely. And today we set our own goals, and we're far more influenced by sites and fitness experts and devices than we are by medical professionals. Fitness has become more combative. You want to crush your workout. You want explosive strength and ultra extreme warrior workouts, and it has become much more about domination. CrossFit, the fastest growing type of gym in the world, allegedly the most physically punishing. And this is a quote from them. "We have sought to build a program that will best prepare trainees for any physical contingency," the company boasts, "not only for the unknown, but for the unknowable. And the latter category includes the zombie apocalypse. The mind's struggle for mastery over the body has become a kind of mortal combat." And then it talks about Oscar Pistorius, who's serving a sentence for the 2013 murder of his girlfriend, has a tattoo on his back from the Bible. "I do not run like a man running aimlessly. I do not fight like a man beating the air. I execute each stride with intent. I beat my body and make it my slave. I bring it under my complete subjection." Yikes. So now we have chapter 5, the madness of mindfulness. We're all told, listen to your body and trust your body. And she says this is very philosophical, very religious. The superiority of mind over body is the superiority of spirit over matter. She says every religion in the world is into that. And the 3rd century Manichaean religion is a combination of Buddhism and Christian Gnosticism and other philosophies thrown in. It's all a struggle between good and the spiritual world of light, and evil and the material world of dark. And that's what wellness has turned into. This is all specially beloved by medieval saints. They were very into self-mortification. They would starve and fast and beat themselves. And even today, religious people will be submissive to the material needs of their bodies. For example, some religions have dietary laws, or there are periodic rules of silence. You wear certain clothes. You kneel when you pray. Kneeling is very uncomfortable. God can hear you if you're sitting on your butt, Mind and spirit are used to keep a tight rein on the body. Anorexia is all about absolute purity, the transcendence of the flesh. Today's fitness culture has echoes of all of this. It also, in this fitness culture, she says, has echoes of a lot of mental disorders like narcissism and masochism and OCD. And they want you to trust the wisdom of your mind, and they want you to subjugate your body. A 2015 study said the average adult attention span has decreased from 12 seconds a dozen years ago to 8 seconds now, which is shorter than the attention span of a goldfish. Just a little aside, last night watched a movie I've never seen called Idiocracy. I heard it recommended somewhere. Oh my God, it was so depressing. It's supposed to be funny. It reminded me a little of Dr. Strangelove. Sort of Dr. Strangelove meets Mad Max. And with Luke Wilson and Maya Rudolph, I believe. That's all I'll say about it. This reminds me of that loss of attention span. People are focused so much on screens anymore. Something is wrong with our mind's ability to perceive and understand the world. We're losing our ability to perceive and understand the world. The most common pediatric diagnoses today are asthma and ADHD. But they may not have, those diagnoses may not have anything to do with actual disorders. The parents are targeted by the manufacturers of Ritalin and Adderall, and parents are discovered getting this diagnosis so that they can use the diagnosis to buy their kids more time for test taking. It's a major advantage. If you have one of these diagnoses, you can play that card and get special consideration in school, and it is an advantage. I'd like to think nobody here would ever do something like that, but there is a world out there. Look at the college bribery scandal to get people into school. I mean, rich people will do anything. But it's been shown that as the amount of screen time increases, the worse your attention span becomes. And let's see here. Neuroscience confirmed that electronic addiction was rewiring the human brain, depleting attention spans, and degrading the quality of sleep. In fact, as they withdrew from the physical world into their texts and their tweets, adults could see the same thing happening to themselves. The term distracted parenting was invented to describe the parent who could barely focus on his or her children anymore, certainly not to the degree required to enforce a few hours of abstinence from devices a day. And what good could a parent do when the schools themselves increasingly use laptops and iPads as instruments of learning? The small screen seems to have swallowed the world. And then, of course, they talk about Silicon Valley. The diagnosis of autism and Asperger's are skyrocketing in Santa Clara County. In the adult population of the valley, you have people like Steve Jobs, who alternated between obsessive attention to detail and complete withdrawal into himself, between a spiritual aloofness and uncontrolled temper tantrums. Some observers think that they detect a hint of autism in the unblinking, almost affect-free Bill Gates. And let's see, trying to some stuff we don't know. So there's a Silicon Valley syndrome, which is a collection of personality traits and physical characteristics specific to people residing around the San Francisco Bay Area. Huh. So they're saying that Silicon Valley is ground zero for the inattentiveness epidemic. I walk every day. I see a young woman pretty frequently pushing a baby stroller. She pushes it with her elbows because she spends the entire time on her phone, both hands on her phone. She's pushing this with her elbows. I see all the time, all the time. The Silicon Valley product is actually enfeebling its users to the point of crisis. As I speak to a screen. Jumping from hyperlink to texts to Twitter to Facebook and back and forth, it creates damaged neural synapses that are too fragile to house large thoughts, that they actually do not make the kind of neurological connections you need to be able to have sophisticated or complex ideas. And there actually now exist digital detox camps where adults pay to live without digital devices to reconnect with the real world. Silicon Valley also has an arrogance problem. It has created many tech billionaires, and it breeds megalomania and what's called solutionism. And I've never heard of this. It's an intellectual pathology that recognizes problems as problems based on just one criterion, whether they are solvable with a nice, clean technological solution that's at our disposal. And then here's one of these guys says, our bodies and the internet are not all that different. They're both complex systems with big pieces of data that are missing, misunderstood, or hidden. When I looked at my body that way, I realized that I could learn to hack my biology using the same techniques I use to hack computer systems on the internet. So there's a whole new set of entrepreneurs of biohacking. And she says that this kind of healthcare is sort of the equivalent of witchcraft, and it's just based on traditions and not real data. And this guy called Kurzweil, who's into looking at the body as a machine that can be programmed, and you can take X number of pills and do X number of exercises, vitamin pills and exercises, and control everything. He wants to load our body. He wants immortality and wants to load our bodies with millions of nanobots to fight disease. And then nobody ever has to be sick. Then Peter Thiel, the billionaire co-founder of PayPal, plans to live to be 120. Compared with some other tech billionaires, he doesn't seem particularly ambitious. Dmitry Itskov, the godfather of the Russian internet, says his goal is to live to be 10,000. Larry Ellison, co-founder of Oracle, finds the notion of accepting mortality incomprehensible. And Sergey Brin, co-founder of Google, hopes to someday cure death. Larry Ellison is used to getting his own way and doesn't see why that should ever stop. Death makes me very angry, he says. He spent hundreds of millions of dollars to fund anti-aging research. If you're one of the richest men in the world, and presumably, since this is Silicon Valley, one of the smartest, why should you ever die? So they're looking for solutions that are available on devices, that are marketable and convenient. This guy called John Kabat-Zinn, who's a Zen psychologist, took the secular core of Buddhism and called it mindfulness, and he invented the whole movement. He says, the probable connection to Buddhism emerged when I had to turn to do a tenants' rights group to collect my security deposit. People like me, renters, she responded in an angry letter, were oppressing Tibetans and disrespecting the Dalai Lama. Buddhism, or some adaptation thereof, was becoming a class signifier among Caucasians, and nowhere was it more ostentatious than in Silicon Valley, where star player Steve Jobs had been a Buddhist or perhaps a Hindu. He seems not to have made a distinction, even before it was fashionable for CEOs to claim a spiritual life. Guided by an in-house Buddhist, Google started offering its, quote, search inside yourself trainings, promoting attention and self-knowledge in 2007. Buddhism as a class signifier says you pay a few $1,000s and you can go to this Buddhist monastery and they'll let you do manual labor. I'm sorry. This just cracks me up. Rich people in the internet world, they'll pay several $1,000s to this monastery for the privilege of going and like working in the yard. I'll let them work in my yard for free. I'll take a couple of $1,000s. Richard Gere, who she calls Hollywood's chief Buddhist, has this guy his former assistant, Soren Gordhammer, who was broke and divorced and addicted to Twitter, and he started something in San Francisco called Wisdom 2.0, and the conferences were a place where corporate leaders and celebrity gurus could share the source of their serenity, their mindfulness, and that then the new world order of innovating and interactive technology tapped into that, and they were getting wisdom from this technology, and they were willing to share it with each other and share. I mean, it's just very arrogant, making them not the creators of distracting devices, but saviors from the inattention of the devices. Then they discovered this. They invented this thing called Headspace Corporation, which created meditation apps to deliver a frazzled population from the distractions of technology. So let me repeat that. They invented apps to help you meditate, to get rid of the stress of using apps. She says mass market mindfulness. It was genius. A great problem that you can solve for a price. So now all these apps, there's greater than 500 mindfulness apps, things like with names like Simply Being or Buddhify. And it's like mindfulness on a smartphone. And they're very huge. Mindfulness and all this stuff is very huge with celebrities. Ariana Huffington, Gwyneth Paltrow, Anderson Cooper, they're all in some way cashing in on this. It debuted at Davos in 2013 to an overflow crowd. And Wisdom 2.0 conferences take place in New York and Dublin, as well as San Francisco, with attendees often fanning out to become missionaries for the new mindset, starting their own coaching businesses or designing their own apps. A recent Wisdom 2.0 event in San Francisco advertised speeches to corporate representatives of Starbucks and Eileen Fisher, as well as familiar faces from Google and Facebook. Aetna Health Insurance offers its 34,000 employees a 12-week program and dreams of expanding to include all its customers, who will presumably be made healthier by clearing their minds. Even General Mills, which dates back to the 19th century, has added meditation rooms to its buildings, finding that a 7-week course produces striking results. 83% of participants said they were taking time each day to optimize their personal productivity, up from 23% before the course. 82% said they now take time to eliminate tasks with limited productivity value. And I might add that it's no surprise that someplace like General Mills would do that, because didn't Post or Kellogg or somebody start General Mills? And if you read The Road to Wellsville by T.C. Boyle from Santa Barbara, he writes a novel based on these health spas that Kellogg and Post had in places like Santa Barbara in the 1880s, the 1890s, where you could go and eat bran and have enemas and sit and sweat in hot tubs surrounded by towels around your neck, and it was going to make you healthy. Nothing new under the sun. So Silicon Valley gave its imprimatur to wellness, and they consider themselves the innovation center of the universe, the home of the best and the brightest. The tech industry sees mindfulness as based in science. It's not hippie BS or woohoo. A study in 2004 studied Buddhist monks, and after tens of thousands of hours of meditation, they could alter their brain activity. So why not an app? Contemplative neuroscience, it likes to claim that they can increase your neuroplasticity, but it's an innate property of brain tissue that it is plastic. That if you use portions of your brain will increase its connections and improve. And if you don't use it, you lose it. They increase with use, they decrease with neglect. Meditation doesn't change this any more or less than any other distraction or relaxation technique. You have to use those parts of your brains for the functions that they're intended to be used for. Meditation is a whole other thing, but there's this conflation of Eastern philosophy and religious practices and mindfulness. So it may be good to lower stress meditation, but it won't make new brain connections. That's not, you're mixing apples and oranges. Mindfulness industry tries to sell mind as muscle, that you're working with the brain, a muscle when you're working with your mind. But there's no study to say that. There's no proof that these apps have any effect at all. They're sometimes touted as a gym membership for the mind. They sell mindfulness as fitness training, and it's simply not true. It's never been proven. There's no reason at all to believe this. It's not founded in evidentiary science at all. But, it's a small price to pay for eternal life, is what she said. Chapter 6 is death in a social context. Many who get caught up in health crazes of the 90s, many who did get caught up in the health crazes of the 90s, have died. For example, Lucille Roberts, who started the women's gym, Curves, claimed she was an exercise nut, and she died at 59 of lung cancer. Jerry Rubin, who was into diet fads and therapies and meditation, he jaywalked and got hit by a car and died when he was 56. And if this trend continues, everyone in the fitness culture will die. This is all very snarky, very tongue-in-cheek, as well as everyone else who sat it all out. There were some shocking deaths, really. Jerome Rodale, who wrote Prevention Magazine, had a heart attack at 72 in the middle of taping the Dick Cavett show about how healthy he was at 72. Jim Fixx, the Complete Book of Running guy, who was all into diet and ran 10 miles a day, died while on a run at the age of 52. In 2017, Henry Lodge, who wrote Younger Next Year, Live Strong, Fit, and Sexy Until You're 80 and Beyond, died of pancreatic cancer at 58. John H. Knowles, the director of the Rockefeller Foundation, who wrote The Doctrine of Personal Responsibility. I didn't write down what happened to him, but I bet it's good if I... Most illnesses are self-inflicted, the result of gluttony, alcohol, intemperance, reckless driving, sexual frenzy, and smoking, as well as other bad choices. The idea of a right to health should be replaced by the idea of an individual moral obligation to preserve one's own health. He died of pancreatic cancer at the age of 52, prompting one physician to observe that clearly we can't always be held responsible for our health. David Bowie and Alan Rickman both died in 2016 of what major U.S. newspapers described only as cancer. Some readers complained that it was the responsibility of obituaries to reveal what kind of cancer. Ostensibly, this information would help promote awareness of the particular cancer involved, as Betty Ford's openness about her breast cancer diagnosis helped to destigmatize that disease. It would also, of course, prompt judgments about the victim's lifestyle. Would David Bowie have died at the quite respectable age of 69, she says, if he had not been a smoker? Apple co-founder Steve Jobs' 2011 death from pancreatic cancer continues to spark debate. He was a food faddist, specifically a consumer only of raw vegan foods, especially fruit, refusing to deviate from that plan even when doctors recommended a diet high in protein and fat to help compensate for his failing pancreas. His office refrigerator was filled with Odwalla juice. He antagonized non-vegan associates by attempting to proselytize among them. As biographer Walter Isaacson has reported, at a meal with Mitch Kapoor, the chairman of Lotus Software, Jobs was horrified to see Kapoor slathering butter on his bread and asked him, "Have you ever heard of serum cholesterol?" Kapoor responded, "I'll make you a deal. You stay away from commenting on my dietary habits and I'll stay away from the subject of your personality." Oh, God. Oh, well. Incidentally, at 67, Mitch Kapoor is alive and well at the time of this writing. When people die, everyone does a biomoral autopsy. Did he smoke? Did he drink? Did he eat fat? Did he eat enough fiber? Can he be blamed? So I read about David Bowie. We always look for conscious agency, that someone or something has to be blamed. We need to know that that everything makes sense, that there's something we can do to avoid it happening to us. In AD 79, Pompeii was buried by Mount Vesuvius, and when that happened, the Romans shrugged and say, well, you know, the gods are capricious and amoral, which they were. But in 1755, when Lisbon suffered an earthquake and a tsunami and a resulting fire, and 60,000 people died, the monotheistic one God who's all good type attitude said, well, it must be because Lisbon was wicked. And this caused Voltaire to let me read what this says here. Hang on. Caused Voltaire to refute a good God, and he said that these things happen from natural events, natural causes, and they were not moral lessons. So he wrote this little ditty about the idea of a good God. And can you then impute a sinful deed to babes who in their mothers' bosoms bleed? Was then more vice in fallen Lisbon found than Paris, where voluptuous joys abound? Was less debauchery to London known, where opulence luxurious holds the throne? Anyway, 300 years later, today, we're still looking for moral failings to explain why people die. That way we can avoid the same fate. You know, if we just find the right combination of vitamins and diet and exercise, we'll live forever. Every death is a suicide because we know what not to do. Susan Sontag said that illness is a metaphor versus the oppressive moralizing of disease. Even breast cancer has been blamed on personality and not environmental carcinogens. And as we know now, there are genetic components to that. The poor resisted this whole healthcare craze because it was too expensive. And this sort of gave rise to the notion that the poor are willfully unhealthy. And, you know, we already think they're illiterate louts. Well, this proves that even farther. Jamie Oliver, a cook, a chef, I guess, he tried to reform school lunches, and mothers were bringing hamburgers to the fence at school and pushing it through the fence at their children on the playground because the kids were throwing the healthy food away. And the administration of the school started complaining that the meals were way over budget. And the nutritionists were saying, well, these meals are too low calorie. Junk food is meant to be addictive. It's not their fault. And he didn't try to creatively modify the diet the kids were already used to look at their habits and try to work around that. He just told the parents, oh, you're killing your children. And it was terrible. He had mothers crying in the schools. And so what compromises the wrong food that kills you changes all the time. In the 80s and 90s, it was fat. And then we had an obesity epidemic. And then there was the whole, you can't eat cholesterol thing. Remember when you couldn't eat eggs? I remember when I was, teenager in my 20s, lecturing my mother about how bad eggs were for you. Then there was a period of time where women were forced to eat high calcium. But today the villains are sugar and carbohydrates. Fast food is considered the food of the ignorant. This movie, Idiocracy, you could really see that. You could see the whole commentary on diet and nutrition. It's pretty funny. Morgan Spurlock did that movie Super Size Me and went on a steady diet of nothing but McDonald's and gained 24 pounds and developed high cholesterol. The author, Barbara, ate fast food for a while because it was cheap. It was what she could afford. But she said she did skip the French fries and the sodas. She just ate like extra hamburger patties and more of the protein. And let's see what she has to say about that. When at a later point a notable food writer called to interview me on the subject of fast food, I started by mentioning my favorites, Wendy's and Popeyes, but it turned out that they were all indistinguishable to him. He wanted a comment on the general category, which was to me like asking what I thought about restaurants. I've never seen a Popeyes. I don't know what that's like. So, those probably regional, right? So she equates all of this, like how we treat smokers now. To be a smoker now is to be a pariah and a sneak. In the 40s and 50s, it was a social glue, is what it was. In a 1936 Steinbeck novel, an older labor organizer tells a young migrant worker, he offers him a rolled up cigarette with advice. You ought to take up smoking. It's a nice social habit. You'll have to talk to a lot of strangers in your time. I don't know any quicker way to soften a stranger down than to offer him a smoke or even to ask him for one. And a lot of guys feel insulted if they offer you a cigarette and you don't take it. You better start. The war on smoking was a war against the working class. Bars lost customers and people lost the public socialization aspect of going to these sorts of places. It became illegal to sell loose cigarettes. That's what got Eric Gardner killed. Well, that and a little racism on top of it. But he was selling separate cigarettes, instead of selling, he would buy a box and then sell the cigarettes separately, because if you don't have enough money to buy a pack, why smoking? You give into peer pressure, it's addictive, but nobody wants to talk about the pleasure of smoking. This somebody wrote in their journal, I love smoking. I like the way it tastes after a meal or with the cocktail. I like the way it fends off boredom. I like it on a hot, sweaty summer day, and I like it on a cold, crisp winter night. In the end, the ritual and routine of smoking, not to mention the nicotine, puts me at ease and relaxes me. When I was young, everybody smoked. All the women I knew smoked. Really, all the nurses I worked with smoked. Because it helped you lose weight. And they realize now that it does, that nicotine in your bloodstream makes your liver break down glycogen, put sugar into your bloodstream. And it lowers your appetite. So it is possible to use cigarettes as a dietary tool. And conversely, often when you quit smoking, you'll gain weight because you don't have that to depend on anymore. Plus, you're also eating more because you need something to do with your hands. It's a paired response, that psychological thing where you associate a physical action with something else, and when they're paired, without one, you need the other. Yeah. Nicotine activates reward pathways in the brain. It provides self-nurturance. It helps to counter stress and boredom, and it helps with overwork. This woman who was a woman who had low-wage worker with 2 jobs and 2 children said, I smoke. It's expensive, but it's also the best option. You see, I'm always exhausted. It's a stimulant. When I'm too tired to walk one more step, I can smoke and go for another hour. When I'm enraged and beaten down and incapable of accomplishing one more thing, I can smoke and I feel a little better just for a minute. It's the only relaxation I'm allowed. Nothing has happened to ease the pressure on low-wage workers. On the contrary, if the old paradigm of a blue-collar job was 40 hours a week, an annual 2-week vacation, and benefits such as a pension and health insurance, the new expectation is that one will work on demand as needed without benefits or guarantees of any kind. Some surveys now find a majority of U.S. retail workers working without regular schedules, on call for when the employer wants them to come, unable to predict how much they will earn from week to week or even day to day. With the rise in just-in-time scheduling, it becomes impossible to plan ahead. Will you have enough money to pay the rent? Who will take care of the children? The consequences of employee flexibility can be just as damaging as a program of random electric shocks applied to caged laboratory animals. Levels of stress increase as you move down the socioeconomic ladder. It's got to do with the cortisol in the brain. And those who have the least control over their work have the highest stress. And add the stress of poverty to that. In the first decade of the 21st century, the increase in deaths amongst poor white people increased. Smoking could account for 1/5 to 1/3 of the excess deaths. The rest were apparently attributable to alcoholism, opioid addiction, and actual suicide, as opposed to metaphorically killing oneself through unwise lifestyle choices. There's the loss of blue-collar jobs, the lack of benefits, the erratic scheduling, no vacations. For example, in the USSR, when the Union fell apart, male life expectancy went from 62 years, that's not very long, to 58. And much of it had to do with the loss of social benefits. When the government fell, benefits that everybody got that depended on it, places to live, for example, health care, that kind of thing, were no longer guaranteed, and it increased stress very dramatically, and the death rate went up. Americans are now facing the reality that causes poverty and shortens your lifespan. Wellness is now in corporate programs. This whole trend of mindfulness and wellness, it's associated with money. It can be punitive for lower wage workers who have to participate or pay higher fees. There's monitoring, there's pressure. And in the domain of the wealthy, it's a luxury pursuit. It offers status. It's a symbol of status to walk around with your yoga bag or your green juice. Signals to people where your head is at. There's a boom in wellness resorts. So here's an ad for a wellness resort. Our private customized wellness retreats will reconnect you to your mind, body, and spirit in some of the world's most breathtaking places. We invite you to partake in sacred rituals alongside the Kalahari's shamans. Rebalance your body with private yoga classes in ancient Indian temples. Refocus your mind as you chant with monks in Bhutan, and partake in healing practices such as massage, Reiki, and soaking in hot springs at luxurious onsens throughout the Japanese countryside. Whether you find yourself meditating in the foothills of the Himalayas or engulfed in the peaceful solitude of Botswana's salt pans, our wellness vacations will take you on an adventure of purpose, power, and personal reward. The whole theme to all of this is harmony, wholeness, and balance. It's the philosophy of holism, Holism. Everything is connected, that holistic thing. To feel good, of course, is the same as feeling powerful. Put in more mechanical terms, wellness is the means to remake oneself into an ever more perfect self-correcting machine, capable of setting goals and moving toward them with smooth determination. As Kierkegaard wrote in a famous devotional text, purity of heart is to will one thing, although he did not mean that one thing was stronger quadriceps. So, Chapter 7, the war between conflict and harmony. Maybe I'll stop and start this on a new video. I think that will be the end of video number 2 right now, and I'll go on and make number 3. I hope you're enjoying this. I thought it was a nice departure from politics. I hope you guys agree, and I'll be back soon with part 3. And in the meantime, Slángafoil. or slancha.